The Civil Rights Act is a cornerstone in the development of civil rights and anti-discrimination law in the United States. It has several pieces of legislation, but the one that is most commonly referred to is the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Before delving into the Civil Rights Act of 1964, it is worth mentioning that this wasn't the first civil rights legislation in the United States. In fact, the first Civil Rights Act was enacted in 1866, shortly after the Civil War. This legislation was aimed at protecting the rights of African Americans, particularly former slaves, and was followed by other civil rights acts in 1871, 1875, 1957, and 1960, which aimed at eliminating various forms of racial discrimination. The Civil Rights Act of 1964, it is pivotal because it addressed not just discrimination on the basis of race, but also color, religion, sex, and national origin. This act was a major turning point in American history, as it marked a tangible commitment by the federal government to ensure equal treatment of individuals, regardless of their background. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 was initially proposed by President John F. Kennedy before his assassination, but was signed into law by President Lyndon B. Johnson on July 2, 1964, after a tumultuous journey through Congress. Supporters of the act were diverse. The civil rights movement, led by figures like Martin Luther King Jr., had been advocating for an end to racial segregation and discrimination. Many Northern Democrats and a significant number of Republicans in Congress, notably Senate Minority Leader Everett Dirksen, backed the legislation, seeing it as a moral and necessary step towards equality and justice. President Lyndon B. Johnson, who assumed office after the assassination of John F. Kennedy, also championed the act, utilizing his political acumen to garner support. On the other side, opposition primarily came from Southern Democrats who were vehemently against federal intervention in what they considered states' rights issues. They viewed the act as an infringement on their way of life and were worried about the social changes it might bring. These Southern Democrats, often associated with preserving segregationist policies, led filibusters and used other tactics to try to prevent the passage of the act. President Johnson is famously believed to have made a remark upon signing the act, predicting that the Democratic Party would lose the support of the South for a generation. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 is composed of 11 titles, each addressing different facets of discrimination. Title I prohibits discriminatory practices in voter registration, which was a major issue, especially in the southern states where various tactics were used to prevent African Americans from voting. Title II is focused on public accommodations, outlawing discrimination in hotels, restaurants, theaters, and other public places. Title III pertains to public facilities, prohibiting segregation or discrimination in any facility owned by a state or local government. Title IV is centered on education, encouraging desegregation of public schools. This part of the law provided assistance and also allowed federal agencies to withhold funds from schools that continued to enforce segregation. Title V empowers the Civil Rights Commission to enforce and monitor the civil rights statutes. Title VI prohibits discrimination in federally funded programs and activities. This was significant as it could be used to enforce desegregation of schools and other public institutions that received federal funds. Title VII is perhaps one of the most notable sections of the Act, as it prohibits employment discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, EEOC, was established under this title to enforce these provisions. Title VIII, also known as the Fair Housing Act, was actually passed later in 1968. It prohibits discrimination in the sale, rental, or financing of housing. Title IX made it easier to move civil rights cases from state courts, which were often biased, to federal courts. Title X established a community relations service to help resolve disputes arising from discriminatory practices. Title XI contains miscellaneous provisions relating to the enforcement and support of other titles. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 had a profound impact on American society. It not only legally dismantled much of the institutional discrimination that had been prevalent, particularly in the South, but it also played a major role in changing attitudes towards race and discrimination. While the Act did not resolve all issues and further legislation and action have been needed, it remains one of the most important civil rights legislations in American history.